Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, Bonusgate, the budget, what's going on in the legislature in the fall. We have a little panel of experts that will help us understand all of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program, and again, thanks for watching. Well, we have a panel, a regular panel actually, it comes on occasionally to chat about some important subjects. I want to talk about Bonusgate. Everybody is aware of that. We'll brief you again if you are not. We'll get in a little bit to the big important areas of the state budget that was approved early July, $28.2 billion, and then what's ahead for the fall. So joining me, as often is the case, I'll point right there, is Gene Barr. He is the Vice President for Government and Public Affairs. Do I got that?
You got it.
At the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Over here on my right. Come on. No, we'll stay over there. Now we'll go there. We'll stay there. Here is Fred Anton. He's the President and Chairman of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. And then across from me is Jim Redmond. He's the Senior Vice President with the Hospital and Healthsystem Association. No more titles, I promise. All right, let's get into this a little bit. Gene, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come to Fred, and then we'll come to Jim. Look, sensational. 12 representatives and staffers indicted. It's a huge deal. Potential to disrupt the entire legislature. The Attorney General has said on this program last week there'll be more indictments. What's your sense about what that means over in the legislature, a place you frequent often?
Well, Terry, it is major. I mean, it has immediate repercussions. It has repercussions for the fall term, has repercussions, obviously, for the election, has repercussions for leadership. For those of us who work the legislature, I think it's not only sensationalistic, it's sad. Many of us know these people, and it's sad when you work in that system for us to see it taken to that level, and it's extremely unfortunate. And if you look at what the Attorney General's put forward, it's a significant patter of abuse of taxpayer dollars.
You know, Fred, Gene raises a good point. You know, occasionally we'd see somebody indicted. Now, you've lived through, many of these. Individually, for some problem, Senator Fumo in Philadelphia has a problem. Representative Habe is now serving time as we sit here. I think he's serving time. Is that right? Yeah, he's serving time. This is massive in its scope. Did this shock you?
It shocks me, the detail, but what is not been reported here is the background for this. And when I say the background, I mean the number one priority of each individual legislator, and particularly House members, is to get reelected. And there's a paucity of resources for them to accomplish that mission. Now, the number one objective of the House leaders is, in a closely divided body, to get control of the body. So there's tremendous pressure on them to either raise resources or divert resources to this effort. And you really have to know, as these gentlemen do, and I do, what the history was of and is of staffers participating in these elections to understand this.
Yeah, but now, okay, let's pick up on the point, Jim Redmond, let's pick up on the point that Fred just mentioned. I mean, in the past, as everybody in this table knows, staffers went out and campaigned. The point was they were supposed to be doing it in the evenings or on legitimate compensatory time, right? This looks very different from what we've seen in the past, not suggesting that there weren't some malfactoring going on in the past, but this is comprehensive, widespread, sweeping, where people had no job but to campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly unbelievable, and Gene's right. We know many of these people, and we're saddened by this, and it really reflects negatively on the whole legislative government process in Pennsylvania. And that's unfortunate because so many of the people that work in the legislature try to do the right thing and try to do the right thing for Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there are, some 3,000 people, I think, who work. Do you all have the exact number? 3,000 strikes me as about, I think I've read 3,000 people, and it is a little sad that all the good people who do work and play by the rules, are painted with this brush that affects 12. And by the way, on this program, last week, the Attorney General of this state said, it ain't over. I asked him, will there be indictments, future indictments? And he said, yeah. Does that, Gene, strike you as members or staffers and living in fear? I mean, you get over there. You talk to these people.
I think people are certainly clearly apprehensive about it. It's hard to get a true sense of where people are, but I think that the Attorney General in the press conference made it clear that, quote, the investigation is ongoing. Yeah. And I think he also made it clear, and I think he made a very interesting statement at the beginning. He started this press conference by remarking that this is not the first time he has indicted someone. As you've remarked, a former representative is now back in jail over very similar type things. So he has touched the Republican side already.
We're going to run to a break, but I want to ask Fred when we come back about this whole issue about whether there's some partisanship. I ask him about that, as everybody is, and we can get into that and more. A very important subject, has tremendous potential to influence what happens in the state politically and in the legislature, as these folks have mentioned to you, and we will be back following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about BonusGate. That's a huge story. It has the potential to make a big difference in what happens to Governor Rendell's agenda in the fall, to the legislature. We're going to talk about that in a few moments. But I want to turn over here to Fred Anton for a minute. Fred, there's been some criticism of the Attorney General that these indictments are selective, that they've only involved right now 12 representatives and staffers, all Ds, all Democrats. What do you think about that?
Well, what I think is this. I think Tom Corbett has been very careful. Tom Corbett is not a demagogue. Tom Corbett has, during his period as Attorney General, not used his office to prosecute people to create a high profile. Everyone I have talked with, and even my reading, although I haven't read the indictments, is impressed by the depth and thoroughness of the work he has done. Now, let me say this. 717 House Democrats received bonuses. Now, I doubt very much that Tom Corbett will indict everyone who merely did some volunteer work and received a bonus. I don't think he will, and frankly, I don't think it's appropriate that he does so. So he's going to have to be careful, and I think he will be careful about the depth of the misbehavior. Now, these people, from the information, have misbehaved themselves. If the allegations.
I mean, look, we don't have to get in, as Fred says, allegations. Good point. We're not going to convict people here. We'll let the court. The courts will decide, who's innocent and who's guilty. But Jim, Fred brings up a really good point. I mean, I've read presentments, and so have you before. I mean, this one had so much specificity to it. It was so comprehensive. The conclusion I think you draw from this is there was a little political machine put together in the Democratic caucus, and much of it had to be done using public resources. That's without getting into the names. Is that a fair?
I've read the indictment, and that's certainly the conclusion that I walk away with.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Gene, do you agree with that? We get a consensus on that.
I think absolutely it is. I mean, to go to Fred's question as well, I mean, what Fred was saying about the staffers, do they ask for the money back now? I think that's a very good question. I mean, there's a lot of money involved in this as well.
Well, and there could be more that we don't know about. I mean, there is a couple $100,000, the source of which the Attorney General said they're still not clear as to where it came from. But that also begs another question, and that is whether there should be, look, all of you work in and around, you don't work for the legislature, you work in and around it, representing, in your case, hospitals, in your case, the business community, in your case, manufacturing, not exactly small concerns in the state. Some pretty important functions get carried out by the folks you represent. Jim, I'll start with you and go around here. what do you think needs to be done remedially to help to make sure this doesn't happen again? I mean, they're working on reforms for some time. Are there things that you would recommend that you can think about that ought to be done that would help?
Well, I think they need to look internally and really perhaps even bring in some outside experts to review their operation and make some recommendations and establish some ground rules on how they will operate.
Tougher auditing, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
transparency would help.
Yep, transparency, auditing, good suggestion. Gene, how about just an outright ban on lobbying gifts above a certain amount? Now we have reporting, we don't have a ban. Is that something you think is a good idea?
Well, that opens up another area. You were talking more about this. I mean, maybe there's an outright ban on employees doing campaign work.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's one way to do it, to go similar to what they do at the federal level. Maybe that's one way. If you want to talk about a lobbyist ban or campaign reform or whatever you want to do, I think we are certainly willing to look at that. It has to be done fairly and equitably across the board so it touches all interests. But certainly something they could look at.
But, I mean, Fred, do you think this is going to spark another one of these waves of discussion about legislative practices? You know that there was a reform commission set up by the Speaker and the Senate and the House. I think took some important steps we ought to acknowledge here to try to clean up some of the things they do, more transparency.
Well, of course, the Senate has passed 8 or 9 bills, which they are calling on the House to enact. One of them is to ban bonuses. But let me say this. I think the interaction between the responsible constituent service and politics is so close that it will be difficult to separate them. I think they're so inexorably intertwined that you ought to, first of all, be realistic and realize that these staffers are going to be doing something that could be characterized as political work. And then you ought to have guidelines which recommend. Now, I know many people who have become important people in government, Phil English and others.
Congressman English,
who were staffers. Yeah. And I know that all of them were required they were required to do political work, or if they wanted to get ahead, they did political work.
Or they wanted to do it. I mean, a lot of the people who are in the staff started out in running campaigns, and that's a good point. We're going to run to a break here. We'll be back. I want to turn importantly to what they did in the budget before they left and what needs to be done for the remainder of our time together. We'll be back after these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The State System is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program where we're going to leave Bonus Gate now and talk about the budget and some of the huge policy issues that are important to Pennsylvanians. Jim Redmond, let me start with you. $28.2 billion. There's still no plan to cover all Pennsylvanians, but the budget does contain some health care changes that are worth talking about. What would you say were the 2 or 3 highlights of the budget? The things they did do. We'll talk about, maybe if we have time, what they didn't do. What did they do?
Well, essentially, from our standpoint, they did restore all of the cuts proposed by the governor, particularly in areas like hospital obstetrical care, neonatal care, burn care, and they also provided some assistance to some small rural hospitals. They didn't follow through with the governor's proposal to carve out pharmaceuticals in the managed care program that the Commonwealth operates. And they did do a little bit for the nursing homes.
Okay.
But there wasn't really anything new major.
But they didn't do, a couple things we've talked about over the previous months that are pretty important. Didn't cover all Pennsylvanians, even though that's not what they call it now.
And they didn't do M-Care abatement.
And they didn't do M-Care abatement, this Medigap coverage for doctors. All right. Boy, they're spending a lot of money on economic and community development in this state. Tons of it. Does that make you all at the Chamber happy or unhappy?
I think there's frustration on the part of the business groups like Fred's and mine, because one of the things that we wanted was to address the structural tax reform that needs to be done for business taxes. And it wasn't done. And the argument is, well, it wasn't a great year. There was still a budget surplus.
Sure.
When you combine this year's surplus with last year's surplus, you have close to $1 billion. And the business community was united in what we were asking for, an end to the way that business taxes are levied that actually punishes people for hiring people in Pennsylvania, and an end to the operating loss provision that's the worst in the U.S. Yeah. And unfortunately, those didn't happen.
Okay. Fred, from your point of view, what did they do that you liked? Anything?
Well, what I didn't like was the governor's philosophical objection to improving the broad-based business taxes. He really should do that. It won't cost that much. The business community is united. The business community has focused on the areas where we think we can improve the Pennsylvania competitive position. And I don't know why the governor insists on only using grants, state grants and funding for site development and so forth as his sole economic development strategy.
I mean, the spending money on, museums and stadiums, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about spending money to clear sites and make
the hazardous waste. Okay.
Well, and that sort of spending now, and incentives also for training and so forth when business comes in. We have that. We have that.
All right, how about, look, a lot of money was appropriated, not as much as he wanted, for bridge repairs and infrastructure. You all basically think that's a good idea?
Well, I think that there are...
Or is it how it gets paid for that you have a problem?
No, I think there are clear areas where it makes sense for government to borrow. If you're borrowing, for example, from a personal perspective, if you're borrowing to buy a house, that makes sense. If you're borrowing to buy groceries, it doesn't. And our concern is that a lot of what we're looking at is borrowing to buy groceries. It's operating issues, and those things we're going to be paying for a long time. The infrastructure issues need to be done. We know we need improvements there. No one's going to raise the motor fuels tax, even though those numbers are going down because people are traveling less and cars are getting more miles per gallon. We know we need to put money there, but some of the other spend doesn't make as much sense.
Well, let's stay on roads and bridges for a minute. Look, one of the big debates has to do with the whole idea of leasing the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They've already approved legislation that would toll Route 80. The Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission is moving ahead as quickly as they can with plans to get that in operation. Governor wants to lease the Turnpike. Doesn't seem like the House Democrats, back to the House Democrats, are particularly in favor of that. Is that dead, Fred Anton? Yeah. Is that dead, this whole idea of leasing? Is it dead?
Well, the idea of tolling 80 isn't dead, and the Turnpike Commission has just come up with a new proposal that they will spend $250 million a year to improve 80.
Do you think leasing is dead?
I think leasing is dead. I think leasing is dead. I think leasing is a bad idea.
This one is on life support.
You think it's a bad idea?
Yes.
We'll have to get you back and talk about that.
This one's on life support. Whether or not leasing long-term makes any sense in another deal remains to be seen.
That's not something in your area, but just from your sense. In your sense, you don't know or you don't...
From my perspective, there doesn't seem to be a clear direction that anyone is headed in terms of solving what is a major problem.
Yeah, the funding in general.
Right.
All right, we'll be back. We're going to see what the fall brings. We'll find out. Important stuff. They're only going to be in a month. Can they do anything, given bonus gate and whatever else is going on? We'll talk about that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Okay, for the last segment, look, look, the fall, gee, a month, that's it. They're in for less than a month. Not much time. They got some big things to do. Jim Redmond, what do you think about what they should take up?
Well, the governor said he wanted his health care plan to be taken up, and I think that there'll be a stab at that. But as you point out, we're in a period, traditionally it's tough to get anything done just prior to an election on tough issues.
Right. And there won't be a session after the election.
Right.
So that takes that away.
Plus, the whole indictments also casts a huge cloud.
So from your point of view, you'd like to see them, I mean, obviously you need the M-Care abatement. That's important to you. Make sure these doctors get that Medigap coverage that we talked about, right? That's a high priority?
Yes. I mean, we need doctors to provide care to the uninsured.
We understand. Yeah, good point. Go ahead.
I would agree. Health care is there. The governor said that it is. There continues to be pressure for that. We have our own concerns with what we see out there. Of course, along with M-Care, you've got the reauthorization of the Healthcare Cost Containment Council, and I don't know how Jim feels, but again, a lot of the M-Care stuff, in our view, would go away had we done joint and several liability reform, as all of us supported. I mean, that would take away the pressure for a lot of this. It would address the root cause of why Medicare, these medical malpractice premiums are so high.
Fred, let me just switch gears here. Look. Do you think all this stuff with BonusGate is going to really affect Rendell's agenda coming up? I mean, you've been through a lot of these administrations, right? It's going to be a tough...
I think that nothing of substance will be addressed in September other than perhaps some votes in the House on the bills that have already been passed by the Senate. In other words, I think they will address legislative reform in the House. Other than that, I think they will not, for the reason Jim gave, that they're just in election mode.
Okay, I got your point.
Once they're in election mode, they are very hesitant.
We're almost out of time. Yes or no answer. Productive September or not?
Not productive.
Probably not.
Not productive.
All right, there you have it. Well, we'll have to see. All right, we'll see you next week. As always, stay well.